All right, you guys, I'm going to ask that we hold all questions to the end because I am recording this. I'm going to start on slide number 2. Okay. So some key notes about this.
We're on the first one.
First one, yes. So some important facts about the new RPA is going to be the loan contingency timeframe and all other basically contingencies. So they're all now going from the 21 days for the loan down to 17 days.
Damn.
And that's the default. So if you need more time, you can, of course, input that. Everything is still negotiable. So the maximum time frame by default is 17 days,
Okay.
and then 7 days for the sellers to disclose. They're trying to stricken.
Yeah, that takes forever.
They're trying to make it more strict for the sellers in a lot of areas for disclosures for a lot of things.
Yeah, because they fucking take forever.
They do, and it delays. So they solve a lot of problems with this new rollout.
So 7 days for sellers.
That's right.
But it's always been 7 days though.
No, it's 10 days.
No, 7 days.
It's been 7 days. It has been 7 days. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It is 7 days. That's why it's like, okay.
So anyways, so the big one is just the 21 days down to 17 days for that loan contingency time frame. So the next is going to be all of the negotiation points are now at the beginning of the contract to make things more seamless and, clear. It's doing it for clarity. Also, there's more pages, but this is just due to bigger print and font. Next is going
What
to
do you
be.
mean all negotiation points move to the beginning?
You'll see. You guys, I'm going to ask you, I'm sorry, but let's just do like questions at the end because I don't want this to be like choppy. But anyways, so next up is going to be a grid-like format. You're going to see that. I'll point it out again when we get to it. And then again, all the time periods are going to be defaulted to the same time period. And it's an all-inclusive RPA. So you don't have a separate RPA for mobile homes and you don't have a separate RPA for probates or anything like that. It's all using this one RPA. And then if you need, and I'll show you when that comes up as well, you can add in an addenda or an addendum that will specify that it's going to be for a mobile home purchase. Yada, yada, yada.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Next is going to be, I just changed the slide, and we're going to do, you can just go ahead and read these through. It's just about the different signatures, and it's more kind of seamless and all of that. It makes everything more clear again.
Oh, wow, they included the RCSD form.
Yeah. So we don't need to disclose whether or not we're with our agencies and whatnot.
Yeah, like for trusts and LLCs and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're not gonna have to use that other form to say who's signing on behalf of the trust or corporation.
Oh, it's for packaging. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Starting how high? Nicole?
like what? What?
What'd you say?
That's starting now, November 1st?
No.
Mid-November.
Is that starting now, effective now?
Mid-November.
No, it's not no. Okay, and then so now I'm on the other slide, RPA page 1, paragraphs 1 through 4. So right here, if you look, I have outlined a couple of, or not outlined, but like red. I took this literally screenshot from the class. Okay, so let me know if you guys have any questions on that at the end. But the first thing is the date prepared. I'm just going to review that again. It's obviously the date that you drafted it, not the date that it's been accepted or anything like that. There's a lot of confusion, and they did make a point about that on the class, so I just wanted to make a point of it here. Next is going to be paragraph or number 1 there. And this introduces the parties involved. Do I have the wrong thing? I do.
Wrong photo.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I get the idea.
Yeah, so basically what it does first is it just does the intro. So you have buyer, seller, and the property address. It doesn't have anything else, like the agents come next. So basically it's just who are we and what are we doing? What are we buying? And then it moves on to the next one, which is number 2. And that's where we don't have to disclose whether or not we are our agencies. So, the AD, whatever.
Yeah, like the Miss Padilla and JohnHart.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't have to do that.
They really just add that like a couple of months, and I think they're taking it back out.
Mm-hmm. And it's not even, it's not required. It's not a requirement that we give them that disclosure.
Agency disclosure.
Exactly. And then the dual agency thing, like the, if you're
Yeah,
from the
that
same
was first
brokerage,
thing.
different branches,
Yeah.
that is a, you're acting as a dual agent. Next is number 3, the grid. And that's, sorry, this is confusing me with the wrong thing.
I know.
But anyways,
Oh, yeah, you accidentally pasted the same one
on the next slide, yeah.
Do you
Oh,
happen
well,
to have the photo that you can just share with us?
I think I deleted them.
Okay.
I know.
It's okay, at least we have an idea on this. I could imagine we talk.
Yeah. I can
Yeah,
imagine too.
I'm sorry, guys. But anyways, there is a spot for when the offer is expired. So it defaults to 3 days after you, after that, the initial date that
Oh,
you
the offer will
submitted.
automatically
Oh,
expire.
shit.
It automatically expires on
Unless you
day
put a
3.
different-
Correct. And it's at 6 p.m. So you'll see when the,
Yeah, that's interesting because.
because there's been a lot of, it's basically for REOs or whatnot. If they don't hear back from that agent, then you're stuck not knowing whether or not your offer got accepted, and it just
Yeah.
automatically, you can just move on. Is basically where that came from.
I hated that when you have to go submit through their website and then they don't get back to you for like fucking 2 weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's why that's there. And then you also, if in case, you do want to act on an expired offer, you are able to do so. And it's still a legitimate offer. Next is going to be the percentage base. So this is basically your initial deposit. So your earnest money.
Right.
And it's going to calculate that for you the first time that you input all of your information.
Fuck, yeah.
Yeah. So it'll calculate that for you for the first time that you input the information. But
really
if you
cool.
have to redo it first, like for example, if you're countered or something like that, you'll have to calculate it yourself.
That's really cool.
Next is going to be, okay, so 3D is actually very important. It's any acceptable method of delivering. So they changed this, and this is again going to be touched on a little bit later, so you don't have to ask too many questions at this point, but basically it's saying if you want to deposit, your initial deposit can be now in the form of a personal check.
Oh,
It can be
yeah.
cash,
wow.
it can be anything, any acceptable method from that escrow that you're working with.
Oh, so it's just determined on the escrow.
Correct, and it is defaulted to wire. However, it does have any other method, okay?
What about sell?
Huh?
Here,
Any acceptable method for the initial deposit. And then this delivery methods as well is, it has to, if you're gonna do cash, it does have to come from your bank account. You can't just get that.
Oh,
From
that makes
anywhere.
my- Yeah, cash is the EMD.
$100,000 cash.
For my EMD.
All right, so next up is gonna be the grid. We're gonna get into this part here. Okay, so that pin drop right there is gonna basically signifies that you can find whatever the term. So for example, 3A, if you go under the paragraph right there, you see paragraph 5. That's where it touches upon in the contract. So it's
Okay.
easy referencing.
582.
Exactly.
5A, yeah, I get it.
Exactly. Then you have over here the paragraph title or contract term, then the terms and conditions, then additional terms. And this is actually really cool. I love the way that they did this. Next up is 3D. Oh, it does have right there. Okay, never mind.
Where's 3D?
Anyways, so it's in the grid. So if you look in the grid and then you go down, so this whole thing is 3.
Oh, yeah,
The whole grid is 3. And then
Oh.
if you go down to D,
D1.
D1, exactly. Or this is D2.
Increase deposit.
Oh,
got it.
Correct. So the increased deposit, buyers don't want to increase their initial deposit on page 1, which is this page here, because it then it doesn't allow for that deposit to be liquidatable and part of the entire contract. So increased deposits are a big deal right now, just because if you get countered as well, that listing agent needs to now put the DID, which is demand for increased deposit form. It's a new form and it's replacing the RID. Okay.
So basically.
Yes.
Oh,
But it was used as a way to explain the initial deposit and the increase in deposit. But now we're using DID, which is a new form that is not yet rolled out. And that's where you're going to outline all of the information regarding that increased deposit, whether or not it's going to be, all the technicalities are now going to be addressed on this new form so that people aren't getting confused, and it is all very liquidatable. So you're able to get your money back, basically. And then the 3%, of the liquidatable deposit is limited to owner occupied units 1 through 4 for single family residences. It's not limited for investors. So if you wanted to do 3%, I mean, more than 3% for an investor's offer, and you would be like, hey, give us 50% liquid, 50% initial deposit, you can do that because everything is liquidatable for investors. So the entire contract or the entire initial
Oh,
deposit.
wow, so they're not protected by the 3%?
No, they are. They
Investors.
are. It's not limited to the 3%. So they're protected for any amount.
Oh, but they could, yeah.
So if they put $50,000.
Exactly.
They can get their deposit back.
Exactly. You know, depending on the contract, if whether or not it's entitled to them
Okay.
is, yeah. Okay, and
I
then
thought they were just like, but they go fuck you to the investors.
they're not limited to the amount of liquidatable funds. Next is if we go over to E, which this is going to touch on the loan amounts. So it defaults to conventional, like the last contract, and it also defaults to 17 days as that loan contingency timeframe now. So there's where we see that timeframe. E2 is going to be anything additional financing. So if you're going to get out a second loan, and this also creates an additional loan contingency time period as well. So both of those will need to be removed if you wanted to do anything under that additional finance amount. You have 2 loan contingencies. Both need to be removed in order to clear.
2 loans?
That's correct. If you use additional, like if you get a second loan, if
You know
you,
why I think they're doing that?
Why?
I think because Biden is coming out with a plan to help people purchase homes. I think he's gonna help people with the down payment.
oh shit.
Yeah, he was talking about doing something like that. So that might be what they're trying to do here.
Maybe, yeah, because they're going through a lot of legislation because it's all been really delayed due to COVID.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to G, the next slide. G1 is going to be, this is now the next page. This is page 2 of the RPA. So G1 is for seller credits assigned by default to closing costs. Or, and then when you do that, you can put other, and you can send it to whatever thing you want to send the costs to. But this R and /N RCC that you see at the last box under additional terms for G1, that's recurring or non-recurring. Okay.
Yeah, that means,
Their prepaid taxes and
Yeah, yeah.
insurances.
That's right, something like that. I don't know.
yeah, so you always say, when you ask for closing costs, you guys say for,
Recurring and non-recurring.
and non-recurring closing costs.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's where you put whether or not it's recurring and non-recurring. Okay.
And,
G1.
G1.
Next, we have H1 through 3. These are defaults. Now, if you are submitting an offer, it is now default assumed that you have all of the necessary documentation to submit with that offer. So you have the verification of down payments, you have the verification of the loan, and then right there, if you follow G3 all the way to the last box, that's where you have all of the, that's where you can pinpoint what exactly you have. So if you have the pre-approval, the pre-qualification, or the fully underwritten pre-approval, or all 3. And this is defaults to, if you don't have it with the offer, you can do 3 days or enter in however many days, but it is assumed, and it is being stressed that you have everything needed prior to submission. Exactly. Okay, next. So the number or the letter I and O are both intentionally left blank. Okay, next we have J, which is just the VP, and this is the same as usual. Next is K. We have, okay, so for K, this is an assignment request. And again, everything is defaulted to 17 days to get that disclosure in. So assignment requests are for if you're going to assign a contract to a different person. So this is for investors mainly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
They're for
this is
wholesalers.
new. Yeah, yeah. Or wholesalers,
They're being
exactly.
nice to wholesalers? What?
Not necessarily. They're making it so that you have a specific amount of time to assign the contract. If you go out of that time, you're not allowed
some
to assign it
people
because they literally, yeah, they'll go in and say, hey, I'm going to
45
assign
days.
this, and
Yeah.
it's too late, and now you're creating
Yeah,
delays.
literally like 30, 45 days into escrow.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
that's
so this is
cool.
what that is addressing here.
They're good, and that's gonna actually
The good,
stop or make a lot of wholesalers hesitant.
yeah,
Because if they can find a buyer in 17 days,
they're
they're
not gonna
screwed.
perform, yeah. Yeah, remember the guy I told you about, Eric? He does it usually within 10 days.
So the AOA forms are
He's really
used,
good.
the AOA forms are gonna be used in this instance here.
Oh, yeah, that
Try-
you already have down, right?
Right, right. Mhm. The trusts, LLCs, corporations, and same entity signers are exempt. So they need to do a different, they need to, or they don't have to do an additional AOA form.
Then everything's 17 days now?
Yeah, everything is 17 days. Next is L2. This creates a cap amount that the prior, this basically addresses the appraisal gap, and it's saying how much your buyer is willing to spend above that.
I like that. And they could put 0 or 20 or
Because we don't,
anything.
because before we were just making our own shit up,
Uh-huh.
and putting it in.
Mhm.
The additional term.
Yeah, but this is
Now
now
they're putting
addressed
it-
That's cool.
to
So
avoid that. Yeah.
I have a question. So what?
Is it for both appraisal?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really cool too, because if you, it shows the buyers on the buyer side how much they're able to pay. And
they
so
could just look at a certain place instead of like in random spots.
exactly, and all of the financing, all of everything is basically right here on
Mm-hmm.
page 1 and 2, right there, very transparent for everybody to see and understand. Okay, so also,
Oh. Nick, stop being ahead of yourself.
I'm still reading the appraisal. Look,
Just playing.
it says here, removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights.
so that's what I was just gonna get to, only for FHA and VAs. So that's only talking, you can, if you get rid of that contingency, doesn't mean anything if you're doing an FHA loan or a VA loan. However, conventional, that you're no longer able to back out due to loans.
That's really fucking good.
It's always been like that.
Really?
They just kind of put
What
that,
the hell?
they just kind of like restated that rule right there
I've
because a
never
lot
seen
of
that
people
rule
didn't
ever.
know it.
Well,
Yeah,
nobody ever told us.
Yeah.
exactly,
Scott,
exactly, yeah.
bitch ass Scott,
Hey, this has been recorded.
Put like a nice little jazz background on it.
Anyways, and
That's
then
that was the transaction
I know.
that we lost it like that. It was bad. And it was an FHA loan. So if I would have run that, I would say, that's why I said that.
oh wow, that's crazy.
That's one of the reasons also why we came.
So that's why they put it right there, because a lot of people didn't know about that,
Even brokers.
even brokers. All right, next slide is going to be L3, which is let me just look through this real quick.
Investigation of so the inspections.
So right here, this is important for the listing agents because this is outlines the time that the buyers are able to have access to the property itself. So for example, you have a lot of buyers who want to start taking measurements so that they can figure out what kind of couches and furniture they want to include right there. This outlines, or this kind of just basically sets a limit on the amount of days within the escrow that you're able to even have access to that property. So definitely pay attention if you're listing a house, and pay attention to that little box there to see if they want to have access to the property the entire time or not. And also that's inconvenient for the sellers themselves. Next is L8. The COP moved to L8 of the contract.
We're L8?
Yes.
The what?
COP. Next we have. Okay, so here also, I wanted to mention that 5 days after the receipt of the document, whatever document it is, and this is again where they're going to be, this is where they're kind of tightening the reins on the sellers, because you can stall. Well, actually, I think I have this in a different slide, so I'm going to just move on from that. Yeah. Okay, so then this is another one. So if you're removing any contingency from L1 through 8, you must check the box either on L1 or L2, if you don't check one of those boxes and it's just removing a contingency from L3 on, you have to attach a CR form. If you don't do this, you basically you don't have the full contract, because just outlining it here does not mean that it's part of the contract. It's not incorporated to the contract. So neglecting to do so is a incomplete contingency removal. Okay. So next we have, so M1 is reworded to match the law of transferring property.
Which one?
M1.
Oh, you're in there.
Yeah. So this is time of possession. So basically I put right here, the house burnt down before I owned it. So that's the buyer. So there's a there's a time frame where if a house were to burn and they're in escrow and they're about to transfer title, there's fights on on whose house it was at that time that the house burnt down. So always the law states that title is officially transferred at the time of recordation.
That's what I was telling you, remember?
Yes, that's
why
what.
you couldn't get keys.
Yeah.
At the time
Of recordation.
Yeah, recording.
Unless otherwise specified in the contract. So they're making that very apparent here.
So basically, if a house burns down in funds, it didn't record, but it's
Yeah, so it's still the sellers. Exactly.
Instead of like, I got the money now.
Nah,
It's your
fuck you.
house.
Exactly.
So
And
if it burns the day that it records, what about if it burns like right before it records, but it's gonna record the same day? And you
If
call
it
it-
hasn't recorded it.
at the time of the recordation,
Yeah, they put a time.
they put a
date on it.
time, yeah, down to the second. All right, so M3 is, okay, so M3, so right now, definitely, they stress this for like a really big chunk of time. You don't want to include tenants in the contract. Because right now, if you go down and read what I put down there, I'm not going to touch on it really a lot right now, just because I want to get through this, but the courts are being slammed, like things for tenants, like court trials for tenants or even evictions have been thrown all the way out as far as 2023. So you want to make sure they told me, or they just said that you shouldn't do any type of tenants in place or anything like that. But they also are now discontinuing that form. So
The tenant in possession form?
yeah, and they're replacing it with the TOPA. This is because it outlines people have been submitting offers with the tenants in possession or in place or whatever, and they haven't reviewed all of the leasing terms and all of that. And so it then ends up ruining, and basically a bunch of court-related issues pop up. So in order to avoid that, they're now outlining all of the leasing information, all of the rent, all of the everything on the TOPA. Okay. And this has not been rolled out yet. So yeah, and then definitely, okay, so then N1 is a big one. So N1 is basically requiring that sellers install any smoke alarms, any
Oh, wow.
water heater bracers, all of that.
N4.
Yeah, all of that, all of the mandatory compliance regulations from the government, these have to be completed within 7 days. And more importantly, before the appraisal goes out.
Yes.
The appraisal.
Because I hate it when it's like smoky truck.
And if- and if
they
it's-
have to go
And they have to
back.
come back. It's like, really?
And you have to pay for them to go back.
Like, how you take a photo?
So now it's all on the seller, and if they're still working out the finer details on the consequences of not doing this, but they will now be charging a reinspection fee that's going to be charged on the sellers, among other things. The details are still being finalized. Next slide. So here is going to be where I touch on that whole 5 days after the receipt thing. So we have that. So they're making it harder for sellers to back out of the contract because CAR is assuming that sellers have already had time to think about everything and they're ready to go, and they have less ability to back out of a contract once they get into one.
Where's this? Oh.
This page right there.
Oh,
So that
nice.
if a seller wants to back out of a deal, they have to make sure that they have met all of their performance requirements, and then they can back out of the deal. However, if they don't have all of their disclosures in, if they haven't performed on their end, then the buyer they have the option to submit a notice to perform and basically stall the transaction from ending. So it's just inconvenient. So they can hold up the cancellation.
So this is assuming once your offer is accepted and in escrow,
Correct.
but not with the signed listing agreement.
Correct. And so then when you submit the notice to perform, after you have then submitted, or the seller has then submitted all of the necessary documents to be up to date and all of that, once they give over that receipt, it's 5 days after that they can hold up the cancellation. So everything in the contract is still negotiable. For example, offers may state that buyers will take on the HOA fees. So I don't know if you guys saw, but previous to this slide, you'll see that the HOA transfer fees and all of that is
Yeah.
required now to be paid by the seller, and they have 3 days to do that.
Okay, so seller must pay HOA fees within 3 days.
Mhm. And then also right here, the sign and return escrow holder provisions, supplemental instructions, N2, they have a default for 5 days. You definitely do want to kick that up to 10 days always. So if you guys have templates, for sure include that as a part of it, because 5 days to get all of those signed and back sometimes is unideal.
Yeah.
So that's for buyer's agents. And then N3, which is the law that states that the seller must pay HOA fees within 3 days. It's a big deal, big deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really good. So it's definitely giving more power back to the buyer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this one is doing.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Alrighty, so then,
So all the sellers are taking advantage of.
yeah, exactly. And they're
Yeah.
addressing that, which is pretty cool.
It is.
This
Yeah.
is history.
Legit, a lot of sellers took advantage of the market.
Are about to change.
Yeah, there's a lot of more there's many regulations that are in the process. For example, this one right here. Oh wait, no, it's not this part. But we'll get to it. So
They're gonna put part of the TDS in the form.
Yeah, I guess so.
Items included.
But
in
this is
next
basically
year.
just to avoid any confusion, because let's say there's a refrigerator in the garage that they want to keep, and they just go take that one and they put it in place of the actual refrigerator that was in the house. They can't do that now. There's one pre-check, which is the bathroom mirrors, because I guess a lot of sellers were taking down their bathroom mirrors and taking them with them, and now they cannot do that. This is pre-checked there.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And so they have additional things. Items excluded is also another point that they wanted to stress, because if you want anything taken down, such as like a barn or something like that, you can now do that, and you have to list it here within the contract, and it is enforceable and whatnot.
That's crazy.
So Q, allocation of costs. The big changes here that we're going to focus on are 5 and 6. This one is very, very important. Points of sale. So Q5 and 6, those are outlining the points of sale, these inspection reports, and this is what I was saying, that they're coming out with a lot more regulations surrounding these points of sale. So frequently, not just like as soon as you go home today, but literally frequently, like all of the time, throughout this whole entire year, you have to check up and follow up on these different points of sale requirements, because they're being made right now. So you should read up on your local county and as much as city regulations, because
Those are those city disclosures, right? The local disclosures.
the local disclosures, all of those. So you need to go and find the maps. This is going to be on the next slide here, but basically if you can have a map to reference where the house that you're talking about is or falls in the map, it'll help you identify those different mandated or required inspections and points of sale. So for example, the defensible space is just one of the many now new requirements that they're going to be going on to, like the city of, I think it was Riverside or something like that. Maybe it was San Bernardino, I forgot. But now they're doing defensible spaces of required inspection, and that includes vacant land. So definitely like Lancaster, Palmdale are things that you want to look into regarding that as well. And the fines for this are insane. Somebody, they were telling me that there was an instance where there was $100,000 fine placed on a homeowner because they didn't move, I think it's 100 feet on all sides of the house, has to be cleared of brush, right?
Yeah.
And so they were fined $100,000 because they didn't do it in time. So there's new time frames, there's new all of these. So definitely look up on those. I didn't look into those quite yet, just because I'm waiting for more to roll out because they haven't rolled out yet. Next is going to be Q9. This is a non-negotiable. Where is Q9? Q9, buyer's lender insurance. Okay, they're just outlining that the buyer always pays for
His own title insurance.
no, the lender's title insurance. They're just outlining that. Next is 12 and 13. This is fixed by law, HOA. Yeah, exactly. That's fixed by law. So that's a non-negotiable as well. Q14 is the move out, move in costs that are associated with HOAs. So if it's a move out cost, the seller has to pay for it. If it's a move in cost, the buyer has to pay for it. That's a non-negotiable. Okay, next up is this just goes into more on the points of sale, retrofitting, fire hazard, 9A reports, defensible space, etc. There's a home hardening map. If you go
What's
into
home hardening?
home hardening is making your house unlikely to be caught in flames if there's a fire. So it's basically like it's putting up fire resistant paint. It's making sure that you don't have any brush around your house that would add to a fire if a flame were to go and spark it.
Yeah,
You know?
that's gonna be big in San Fernando.
Yeah, exactly. So all of these are going to be very, very, very strict. So definitely something to follow up on, especially if you're a buyer's agent and you don't include those reports and say who's going to pay for them. It's going to be up in the air and it's going to be negotiable. Sellers can say, hey, you guys have to pay for this, but the bill for it and all of that. So it's definitely something you want to pay attention to, even when you're writing up offers for the buyer, because it's in their best interest to address these upfront. Yeah. Next is Q16 and 17. These are where you can add in additional fees that you're going to be charging. So for example, the transaction coordinators. Yes. Okay. And it's where you can put those charges right there. Q18.
Wait, you said 16, 17, 18?
Yeah, so 16 and 17 are just for additional costs that you want to charge.
Oh,
And then it identifies who and whatnot. Next is going to be the number 18. So this is another big one. This is new. Now it is required that the buyer's agent submits the home warranty policy. So exactly, not the listing agent. So the listing agent will not be, it has to be submitted under the buyer's agent's name. So the buyer's agent's name is going to be
What
on
I'm
there.
saying is, even
Everything is
sometimes-
still negotiable.
but
Yeah.
sometimes they pay for it and then they end up choosing it. So what you're saying is, even if they pay for it, we can just choose it.
No.
No,
right here-
choosing isn't,
Right here it says home warranty plan, buyers, sellers, or both. Buyers waive home warranty, so by default, I think what she's saying, by default, the buyer has to do it unless.
they have to submit it. No, the
Specifies.
buyer's agent has to submit the policy
Always?
always.
Okay.
So who pays for it, what it is,
No
all of
matter.
everything else is very negotiable.
Yes, right here, buyer, seller, or both. Or buyer waives
To
home
pay- who to
warranty
pay for
or
it?
cost not to exceed, or
Issued
increase
by-
by. And, or issued by, and then the buyer's agent over.
And if it overflows, like if they put a max amount, the buyer has to take on that charge unless otherwise stated.
Oh, I usually give way more.
Okay, moving on. 4A is going to be okay, so here's where you're going to find all of the different addendas in order to make a mobile home sale purchase and whatnot. So you're going to include whatever it is that your transaction is about. You're going to include that addendum right here, okay, under 4A. Other addendum 4B is going to be anything else, all the other addendas. Next is going to be 4C. Now these here, every single one of them are not incorporated into the contract. So if you check one of these boxes, you need to have a separate form filled out and signed in order to make sure that your offer is complete with all necessary signs.
So we need in there, obviously, the first 4 that are selected.
Mhm.
Are those gonna be automatic?
Yes,
And then we probably need to have, what, the 6 statewide?
whatever
and
else you
the
need,
trust
yeah.
delivery.
Yeah, and so remember, all of these here, just because the box is checked does not mean that it's been executed. You need to go ahead and do that separately, okay?